simplistic way of how it works, and then how later on they can be affected differently and feel differently, sometimes sooner, sometimes later, and how that can...
Well, the thing that we have to understand is that, you know, to be in those life and death situations is very powerful. It's a high stimulus environment. And what happens is that when we're in a high stimulus environment, our body gets pumped up, our mind gets pumped up, and we get these adrenaline jolts. We've all had that experience of suddenly driving down the road and somebody pulls out in front of us, or, you know, walking along and suddenly somebody leaps in front of you and you get that little adrenaline jolt. Well, now imagine that you're in that state for hours. You know, you keep getting one jolt after another after another. And then what happens is suddenly you find yourself confronted with a situation that if you don't act immediately, you could die. So now you give yourself another one of these jolts, and suddenly your heart rate goes up to 180 beats per minute. Suddenly you find yourself just moving without really thought. You know, the thing, I saw one study that said once your heart rate gets above 165 beats per minute, your brain doesn't work. And I think that that's probably true in a lot of cases. That then suddenly we're operating off of instinct. We're operating off of training. And I think at that moment, you just do whatever it is you do, what it is you've been trained to, whatever you've been commanded to do. And by doing that, you survive. Now, what happens if that goes on for a long time? Well, your body just stays in that state of readiness and you stay pumped. Now, you get all of these adrenaline. You also get the endorphin release. It's like when you've been running and you sprint for a while and suddenly you start to feel really good. Well, it's because the endorphins are being released. So you've got this surge of energy. You've got these endorphins that are releasing a sense of euphoria, and you got a brain that's not working very well. And so you find yourself in that state day after day after day. What happens after a while is you begin to deplete your system, begin to lose the ability to maintain it. But then an interesting thing happens, because when you live in a high stimulus environment, you start not paying attention to the low stimulus things. And that's part of where the difficulty begins when you come back. Because suddenly the only thing that matters is the high stimulus stuff. Well, most of us, I hope, live in a day-to-day life that isn't required the high stimulus stuff. That most of our lives are about very subtle kinds of things. And so we can feel that subtle change, the subtle good, the subtle bad, and feel good about ourselves in terms of how we're interacting, in terms of what we're doing. But if you come back from a high stress, high stimulus environment like that, suddenly the little thing doesn't seem like a big deal. Suddenly, you know, doing the sweet thing for your sweetie, that's, you know, not going to turn into a hot erotic moment, but it's just a subtle, nice thing. You miss it. You miss it when somebody does it for you. You miss it when you could do it for someone else. And so that affects our relationships. And that's part of what happens when we find ourselves trying to adjust to a relationship after we've been in a high stimulus environment, and we come back and it's not. It's a day-to-day kind of thing. Most of our lives are pretty low stimulus. So they have to struggle with that. They have to struggle with coming back into an understanding of what's important and what's not important in a low stimulus environment.